And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday night Q&A. I'm Clay, joined by the lovely and gracious E-Train. Hello, Melissa. Good to see you.
Hi.
It's been a hot
Hey,
minute.
Melissa.
We had some conflicts and some issues with scheduling, but it's good to be back. Hope all of y'all are doing well and had a good start to the week. Been an interesting week. A lot going on. We've had the blackout in Europe. We had the election in Canada. We've got continuing debate over the tariffs. And those are some of the things that we'll talk about tonight. Also, we had a few questions, so we'll address those and may end up with some more tonight. So hopefully be a fun and interesting show. E-Train has got new internet, so we are cautiously hopeful that will help fix the problem.
So I got to ask, because Melissa, I hope, is watching. Is there any issue from either side? Because I'm getting some lag in Clay's video, which could be me or it could be him.
Could be StreamYard.
Could be StreamYard.
So we had problems a couple of weeks ago, and I really think that was StreamYard.
Could be.
Melissa, you are loved. But do y'all notice either one of us having any lags, breakups? Okay.
Not that you're seeing.
Let us know.
Good.
We're still trying to figure out the technical difficulties that we've been having. Until such a time as we identify some other cause, I'm willing to blame StreamYard. Just for general purposes.
Fair enough.
I don't see or hear the pups. Are they around?
Oh yeah, they're in the other room. There's a gate in between where I am and where they are, just so they don't come in and drive me completely batshit crazy.
Chunk could never do that. Yeah, Chunk could never do that. Well, all right. Let's get started on some of it. And again, this is, Tuesday night Q&A. Some of you have mailed in some questions. If you have something during the show, say something doesn't make sense, then please let us know. Melissa, it's Iris's 11th birthday today.
Who is Iris?
Congratulations to Iris. And who is Iris?
Happy birthday.
We need to have another pet night.
Yes, we do.
Have everybody. We did one of those probably a year and a half ago. But
the bearded dragon.
Yes.
Sorry, I suck at remembering names. Happy birthday, Iris.
Give her a hug from us. Iris is a faithful watcher of the show, and we are grateful for her. So
yes, and throw her some extra crickets.
Yeah, I keep forgetting, Melissa, you have a dragon. It's I just always think of you with pugs. Probably forever will.
And bunnies.
And for those of you that don't know, Melissa is a rather modest pug aficionado. She has a website called Love Pug Circus. So if any of y'all are looking to, find anything cute or fun for pugs, that's a good place to start.
Or anything else.
Love Pug Circus. All right. First question or topic for the night was on the European blackout. Why and what? I'm going to assume most, but not all, have heard of the blackout.
I actually haven't, believe it or not.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for most of yesterday, Spain, Portugal, and France experienced a huge blackout. There were probably 55, 60 million people who were without power for
how long?
almost a day.
Really?
Everything went down. Traffic lights, cell phones, phone lines, hardwired phone lines, residential, commercial electricity, trains. People got stuck on elevators, public transport,
Oh, Lord.
flights. The entire Iberian Peninsula just went into chaos. There were also some blackouts
Okay,
in
so I
the
have to ask.
UK. Do what?
I have to ask a question. I have to ask a question. Is
All
this
right, ask
China
the question.
testing its is this China testing its ability to take down our system?
I don't think so. They've pretty much
Okay.
ruled out a cyber attack.
Okay.
And depending on who you listen to and who you trust, there have been some reasons proposed. As I was saying, there was also blackouts in the UK, though they have not received the publicity that Spain and France received. If you saw the Iberian Peninsula going down, UK going down, you might think it's a coordinated cyber attack, but apparently not. The cause
Mm-hmm.
is somewhat deeper and a little bit more complicated. Now, one of the funny things, and I guess this is somewhat of a hint, about 6 days ago, the government of Spain was celebrating that it hit
Mm-hmm.
its first day of 100% renewable power generation. So, E-Train, does that give you an idea where I'm headed?
Yep.
It does. 6 days ago, they were cheering. Well, they're not cheering this evening. This afternoon, Red Electric, the grid operator, held a conference and stated that it wasn't a cyber attack and it wasn't an atmospheric event. They basically said it was due to running a green system. Now, basically what happened, and I'm
What does
trying to
that
give you
mean, though?
solar and wind. All the electricity was generated by solar and wind.
Yeah, but what does that mean by running a green system? That's why it went down. Why?
Because a solar generation plant, field, whatever, in Spain, southwest of Spain, they haven't given the specific location, suffered what they are calling an event that resulted in the loss of generation. About 1.5 seconds later, a second event to cause the loss of another source of generation. Solar or wind, they didn't specify. And it's likely the first event caused the second. About 3.5 seconds later, the massive drop or vibration in electrical generation caused the border interconnections between Spain and France to fail. Immediately after that, there was a massive loss of renewable generation that just collapsed all around the grid. Melissa, we all know it was really the Bitcoin miners.
That made me think.
That's pretty cute. So the vibration in the production of electricity forced generators all over the country to shut down, causing what they've described as a cascading loss of energy production. Generation in Spain plunged to zero. See, I've learned things. Yeah,
That's the goal.
that's the goal. We still may have to work on exactly that Bitcoin mining thing, but getting close. The Cliff Notes idea is that tolerances in the electrical grid system aren't made for wild fluctuations, because wild fluctuations in electricity can damage electrical equipment. You know, most of you, maybe at work or at home, have a surge protector on your computer or expensive electrical devices. That's to to eliminate the huge changes in voltages that can short or damage your
Current.
equipment.
The current.
The system is just not made for wild fluctuations. It can not accept or accommodate the loss of generation via renewables. Doesn't matter whether it's, due to clouds coming over or wind stopping. It's almost like a cloud and wind roulette. If the wind stops, if heavy clouds, or there is an increase in demand, the system will fail. Because think about it, renewables can't alter their production. They can't go beyond 100% production. Now, a nuclear plant, you can crank it up a little bit. A coal plant, you can crank it up a little bit temporarily. They can adjust the supply while maintaining a base. And that base is apparently what's really important.
Unless there's an EMP. Unless there's an EMP.
Yeah. EMP is a whole different bailiwick. But
would that cause the same reaction?
Pretty much. Yeah, if it was done at the right locations, if it was powerful enough, if it was high enough in the altitude, like an EMP on the ground will be limited to a few miles in terms of impact, just because of the curvature of the earth. And if somebody out there is a flat earther, forgive me. I'm just, being theoretical here. But if it's in the atmosphere, it has a much wider cast, and that would depend on the strength of it.
So you can't rule it out.
Well, in this case, people's devices didn't get fried. Just electrical generation stopped. So it wasn't an EMP.
Okay.
If there's an EMP, most of your electrical devices will probably cease to work. They'll get fried.
Like your cell phones, iPads.
Yeah, your car starting, all that kind of stuff. And there is some debate by people on how effective or extensive that would be. So, but this surge or sudden drop in production basically causes the system to shut down. And if one system shuts down, it creates a cascading effect, causing other systems to shut down, which then cause other systems to shut down. So you need a base of energy. I saw one poster compare it to a dam with water. Dams are built to where the curved, and so the water behind them actually squeezes that curve, compressing it, making it stronger and tighter. Well, if there's no water behind it, it's not as stable, it's not as strong. It's kind of like oil storage tanks. If the oil storage tanks are empty, then a modest wind can cause them to cave in, because they're not made to withstand external pressure, but internal pressure. So, kind of an idea.
Kind of like if you have open can in a vacuum, it will collapse if you turn the vacuum up, the pressure on the outside of it.
Yeah. So the system is just not made to handle vibrations, fluctuations, particularly, under the required base. The generation of electricity, now something like nuclear or coal can produce a very stable base. Solar and wind, much more variable. Um, and the funny thing is, Spain just got rid of a lot of their nuclear. In
Really?
February, the grid operator, Red Electric, warned that disconnections were possible due to, quote, the high penetration of renewables. So the grid operator warned that this was coming. Now, this evening, shortly before we came on, the Spanish prime minister came out and said the problem couldn't be renewables and nuclear sucks. So there you go. I don't know who you want to
Wouldn't
trust, the politician or the actual grid operator, but there you go.
wouldn't it be smarter, Clay, to just have like a nuclear backup at least? Kind
Well,
of running through that is supported by solar?
you would still need to run the nuclear plant because you can't just like turn them on or turn them
Yeah,
off.
that's
But
right,
you
that's what I'm
you need
saying.
the yeah you need the nuclear to provide a solid base. Um,
Right.
and a lot of countries are starting now to move more towards nuclear. There are still some who are greatly opposed to that, but there is kind of an emerging consensus, even among people who would describe themselves as green, that it's probably necessary. Um, but the loss of power is a critical loss. Now, 12 hours, most people would be okay unless you're stuck in a elevator for 12 hours and have claustrophobia. That might be a
I,
little
I would
irritating.
I would not I would not make it. That would be no, nope, nope. Mm-mm.
But people were stranded miles from their home. If you work 15, 20, 30 miles from your home, it's going to be a 8, 9, 10 hour walk. Plus, you have to go back and get your car at some time, wherever you abandon it. If it's in the middle of the road, it'll probably be pushed aside
Wait,
by,
wait. Only if you have an electric car that died, right? I mean, if you have gas, you're good to go, right?
well, yes, yes.
Okay.
Um, People stuck on, I was kind of thinking in my mind, the people stuck on trains, on public transportation, like the electrical trolleys that a lot of the old European
Gotcha.
cities have. Um, but yes, the gasoline uh, ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, were still fine. But in something like this, traffic jams, the lights don't work, cars pile up, emergency vehicles are unable to reach victims who are injured or in need of emergency care. And what most people don't know is that all of Europe appears to have literally been within seconds away from a continent wide blackout. I
Wow.
was reading this one engineer talking about the grid frequency across continental Europe plunged to
Mhm.
49.85 hertz, which is just a
Okay.
hair above the red line for frequency collapse. The normal operating frequency for Europe is 50 hertz. So this was at 49.85. And if it had dropped to 49.8, the whole of Europe would have shut down. Um, Anything outside of the 0.2 hertz triggers the emergency actions. So Europe would have suffered a system-wide cascading blackout. Interesting.
Scary.
At that threshold, you've got, all the major plants, their protective relays activate, they disconnect the plants, and the collapse just accelerates. Now, energy is critical to society. If you just think about if this happens and it's prolonged, one day, okay, there's some confusion, maybe, some runs on the stores. People don't know exactly how long it'll be out, but people have food at home, restaurants still, if they have wood stoves or gas stoves, they can still cook something warm. They've still got bottles of wine, whatever. But if the electrical generation is interrupted for longer, your tap water starts running out in 2 days. People start getting increasingly a little concerned. Stores are, raided. Cash becomes useless. Candle cookers come in handy. Solar cookers might come in handy, which we have those in our store. But,
Yes,
day
we
2 or
do.
3, water starts running out. Refrigerators, the food in them starts spoiling after 4 days? After 5 days, hospitals start failing. They can't get medical supplies. They can't get new bandages. The emergency personnel, police, fire, nurses, doctors they start not showing up because they're staying at home to take care of their family. Gangs start appearing. Looting begins. You go out further, day 8 to 10, you've got significant food spoilage. You've got increased contamination, scarcity, societal order probably continues breaking down extensively. You'll have neighbors eyeing other neighbors for supplies. You've got sewage and waste starting to build up. Most people don't know how to dispose, let's say, of their sewage if they don't have water to flush the toilets. And if the sewage treatment plant can't operate. 2 weeks in, people start running out of critical medicines. Stress and anxiety start going through the roof. Some people are starving. You get the idea. This stuff matters. And, society is actually built on a very, very delicate frame. Order can be greatly disrupted in a small amount of time. We saw that in Katrina. Within a few days, gangs were patrolling the streets in New Orleans, controlling whole segments. So this stuff matters.
Which is why on our Amazon store, we have, which is like y'all can see what I'm doing there. We have all the things, the basic things you need for survival that we've used, that we like, that we can say definitely work. So if you're interested in what, we back, what we support, the link is right there.
And, I'm not trying to convince all of y'all to become a doomsday prepper and, build a bunker and store up for, years, But I will say this, I've seen it repeatedly. I can't even say most every, but I've seen it, many reports of billionaires like Bill Gates at his Hawaii estate, he's building an extensive underground bunker. Many billionaires or people who can afford it are building bunkers. So the main, question is for you, suppose electricity cut out. You couldn't access any money in your bank. Water on the tap gave out in 2 days, which would probably be about normal. Could you provide for yourself and family? That's the big key. Everybody should be able to at least provide for themselves for 30 days to give, there's some semblance of chance for order to be restored in case something major happens. Katrina was such a warning. But this stuff's important. Anybody have any questions about the power outage? Like I say, we don't have the final report. We don't have the final report. I just have the press conference from Red Electric, which was describing what they thought the likely problem was. So we'll see. There will be more information following, and we'll try to keep you updated on it. E-Train, did you say something?
Yeah, Clay and I usually say, it's better, not that we're major. Well, we're prepared, each of us in our own space to, in case of an emergency, we can handle stuff for a while. But, it's always better to be prepared than to be the one that's not, in my opinion. Even if you do it a little at a time, it's better than nothing.
We've had some shows, probably need to have another one on, even like foraging in the woods. You just need to have some ability to have or round up some food and to protect your own stores.
I know Jane's not here, but you can eat dandelions.
Unless you sprayed Roundup on them.
Which is what you do. And she is probably crying right now.
No, I have given up on Roundup. I quit it several years ago once I started seeing some of the
terrible for you.
Yeah, some of the effects of it. I now use a combination of 30% vinegar, salt, and a little dish soap, and that actually works pretty well. And it doesn't permanently contaminate the ground. So, all right.
You and me and the world and the dandelions, I'll appreciate that.
Well, the dandelions in my flower beds are still getting cooked.
Shh. Jane can hear you.
Love you, Jane. And actually, I have some dandelion tea, which is not bad. It tastes a little bit like burnt coffee, kind of earthy, but it's actually not a bad sipping tea. So, and it's, Jane would be the better one to go on about its illustrious benefits for your health or whatever. But yeah, it is actually not bad. Melissa, I bet Isis would like it. Does Isis
You mean Iris?
Dandelions? Iris.
Iris, not Isis. Iris. What is wrong with you?
Lord. Isis was an Egyptian goddess. It's close. Spirited dragon, Egyptian goddess. It's easy to get those confused.
Lord, we're going to be taking off the damn channel now. They're just going to yeet us.
Well, before they do, And yes, I'll go ahead and admit this. I am getting terribly absent-minded. I gave a final today, and the way I make up a test is I make up the questions with the answers, then I copy and paste it, delete the answers, but it's all in one Word file. And then I send it to the printer and have my RA make copies. Well,
Wait. So was it your RA's fault or yours?
Well, ultimately mine.
Well, ultimately, yes.
But the copies, ordered a number of copies for the test. Well, the whole package was sent through the copier. So the answer key was attached to the test I handed out. I'm like,
Sorry.
I'm getting too old for this. But
Oh,
yeah,
come on.
didn't even check the damn exam. I should have. I was kind of
Your
sick of
RA
it
should
after
have
making
too.
it up. Huh?
Your RA should have too.
Well, we have a talk about that separately.
Okay.
Melissa, dandelions are good for them. Good for me and thee.
Isis or Iris?
Both.
Wait, probably both. Oh, Lord.
All right, the next
All right, we're
topic.
only 30 minutes. Hang on.
Pardon?
We're only 30 minutes in. I got tinkle. Excuse me. It's tinkle time.
Oh, geez.
I know.
A little TMI.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. E-Train will be back shortly. A lot of talk, going on about the U.S. economy, possibly, quote unquote, entering a recession. Well, for those of you that have been watching the show for a little while, I've said for at least 6, 7 months, 8 months that the private sector in the U.S. has been in a recession, and talked about how over the past year and a half, the private sector has lost 2 million full-time jobs. That's a recession by any standard. Well, there's a lot of heat being generated on the economy in the media and markets being generated. I couldn't resist. But I wanted to remind everybody that there was a lot going on before November's election. That this really, and the drop in the market, even though it's had a good week, the drop in the market is not unexpected. I've been, saying for quite a while the market was grotesquely overpriced. So, but just keep in mind some context. Before the election in November, we talked about the yield curve inverting, where the short-term rates are higher than the long-term rates. This is usually a very significant recession predictor. Usually a recession begins within 6 months. It's a classic economic warning. There was a global bond rally where yields fell worldwide. It started late in 23 and intensified through mid 24. Investors basically are moving out of stocks, signaling risk off, and lower growth expectations, maybe higher inflation expectations. Swap spreads were also deeply negative. This happens generally when large institutions are intensely hedging for lower for longer rates or monetary fragility, expecting a fall in the dollar, which we've seen. We saw a lot of, foreign banks dumping treasuries. There was major selling in the treasury markets, particularly in July and August of 24, which, if you remember, we talked about the yen carry trade, the Japanese carry trade reversal. Now, what is the yen carry trade? For those of you that are not necessarily familiar with it. Basically, for the previous number of years, the Bank of Japan has had exceptionally low rates. Now, rates in the U.S., have gone up since 2019, and then dropped during COVID, but back up after that. But the Bank of Japan has kept them exceedingly low. So the yen carry trade is where institutional investors like hedge funds will borrow large in yen-denominated loans. Interest rates very low. And so they take this money and they will buy treasuries with a little bit higher yield. Well, they lock in that spread. So that's like free money. They pay 0.1%, they earn 0.3, 0.4%. So they have kind of like free money generator. But that's really not the yen carry trade. That's just kind of a simple arb. Well, they take these dollars and use them as collateral for loans. And they can use this collateral for leverage loans 3 to 50 times the value of the treasuries. So for every dollar, if they have $10 million in treasuries they are pledging as collateral, they can borrow up to $500 million, 50 times leverage. So they take this money and they buy U.S. bonds, corporate bonds, junk bonds, which have a much higher yield. So they again capture that basis spread. It's a basis trade. But that's not all. In many cases, they've taken these junk bonds and pledged them for collateral for loan, and then take that money and use it to buy tech stocks, primarily tech stocks, over the past 2 years. You wonder why tech stocks have blown up and the rest of the stock market has been relatively stagnant for several years. And we talked about that. The Mag 7, Meta, Alphabet, which is Google, NVIDIA, Tesla, Apple. These 7 stocks accounted for the vast majority of movement in the S&P 500. The other 493 stocks really didn't move that much. Melissa, can you explain junk bonds again? Certainly. A junk bond is a bond issued by a corporation that has a below investment grade credit rating. There are 3 main agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, that rate corporate debt as far as the corporation's ability to pay the interest. The highest rating is AAA. Then you've got AA, single A, and then triple B. Well, triple B is the lowest in category called investment grade. So like banks, pension funds, they can buy investment grade bonds. Anything like a double B or B or triple C is referred to as junk bond. It's just kind of a euphemism for non-investment grade bonds. Now, there can be a lot of money made in junk bonds. Michael Milliken in the 80s used junk bonds to finance his empire, take over entire companies at KKR, Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts. In fact, when he was a MBA student at Wharton, and he wrote his thesis on this idea of using junk to finance takeovers, hostile takeovers. And his professor laughed at him and said, that'll never happen. And, we'll not accept this topic. So Milliken just leaves, doesn't finish his degree. And he starts using junk bonds to take over companies, to fund the takeovers of various companies. Makes billions doing it. Now he ends up getting charged, and it was really kind of almost a trivial issue. He has to pay back, $500 million, and he serves 6 months. He went down to Maxwell, which is like a daycare for adults. It's really very light duty. It's actually an Air Force base, and federal, very low risk federal prisoners are sent there, and you'll tend to the commandant's garden, sweep the walkways, whatever. You wear an ankle bracelet and you pretty much have free reign. So yeah, Milliken was arrested and charged. Since then, he has, he's been barred from issuing or underwriting securities, but he started his own hedge fund and doing private medical investments. And he's actually been a genius, just doing some great funding for medical research and startups. So interesting guy. But junk bonds are non-investment grade bonds, lower rated corporate bonds issued by companies. Does that make sense? Does that help? Now, the carry trade. So you saw the people engaging in this carry trade ending up after several different flips investing in tech stocks. Well, if you look at the market, starting with the yen carry trade, the Mag 7 have not done well generally. It's because a lot of these huge hedge funds have ended up having to dump the stocks so that they could pay off and sell the junk bonds, which cause interest rates to go up a little bit, so that they could pay off the loans and reclaim the treasuries, which are for collateral for another set of loans, and then sell those and repay the yen loan, because the Bank of Japan raised their interest rates in August. That's what started that. We're talking about cascading effects. So when they raised the rate on the yen, that ended that basis advantage that it had over some short-term treasuries, or greatly narrowed it. So that's when you saw a lot of dumping and shifts in interest rates. The yen carry trade, as people sum it up. And I hope that makes sense. So we saw a lot of these foreign banks dumping treasuries or major institutions, hedge funds, and with highly leveraged carry trades. And this also started the beginning of pulling assets out of the U.S. market. The higher the rates the Bank of Japan pays, and it's very possible they're about to hike rates again, the higher rates they pay, the more money is pulled out of the U.S. and back into Japan. It's the bank is actually pressuring large institutional investors to pull their money out of the U.S. and bring it to Japan to try to help keep rates down lower, because the government can't afford higher interest rates. that would be a severe problem. It's a severe problem for the US, and Japan is carrying, as far as percentage of GDP, is carrying about double the debt that the US government is carrying. So even a little hike in interest rates blows up their entire budget. So they want Japanese investors buying Japanese bonds. Remember the teeter-totter? The higher the price, the more demand there is for some asset, the higher the price. Well, teeter-totter. For bonds, the higher the price, the lower the interest rate. So we've talked about the teeter-totter several times, and you see that effect going on with the Jap carry trade. China has been under enormous stress for several years. Housing collapsing. I mean, absolutely collapsing. Employees not getting paid. They've had record treasury dumps, like the third quarter of 24, which have signaled major issues in the Chinese economy. And the tariffs, I think, are directly aimed at China, at crushing them even further, trying to basically end them as a economic and military competitor. So I think there's a bigger play at stake there. You also saw European banks, buying bonds. Again, risk-off indicator. There was, drops in consumer confidence. Expectations fell below recession thresholds last summer. You had increased job income fears indicated in surveys. Cracks in the labor market appeared. Hours were weakening, slowing wage growth. You had rising marginally attached numbers. All of those signaled underlying weakness. So my point to you is that the sudden downturn hasn't been all that sudden. The system's fragile. Tariffs, are a spark, but not the primary cause. Markets have long ignored the warnings until they couldn't. So, some people are thinking, hey, it's been a good week. The worst is past. And I've talked about dead cat bounces before. And
oh God, let's not go there again.
Okay. But we've seen them in the Great Depression. We saw them in the subprime crisis. I mean, sometimes these bounces are 20, 30% from the lows before it plunges even further. So what you really got to ask is, have things in the economy absolutely bottomed? Has the market capitulated? Have investors just said, there's no hope. All is lost? That's kind of what I'm looking for. And that's the time you want to buy, when everybody else is just giving up all hope. Melissa, oh no.
Not the dead cat bounce again.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I explained the dead cat bounce last time, and I think that's what Ellen is trying to keep me from explaining again.
Yes.
But how's this explanation? When the market is in a relatively long-term downtrend, there are brief periods when it rises and may rise sharply, but then it continues dropping. How's that?
Okay. Like a flat, or a tennis ball that goes flat while you're bouncing it.
And then regains a little air and then goes even flatter.
God. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like an old dead cat.
Oh God. Anyway. That you don't find on the street. You grab it out of the woods and take it and bounce it on the street.
Or in the neighborhood.
Oh God. Okay.
And any hard surface will work.
I can't do the dead cat thing again.
So anybody have any question over that? You know, there's absolutely tons of media discussion, and everybody is trying to blame the tariffs. Well, if you focus solely on tariffs, you're missing the real picture. There's a lot more going on underneath the scenes, and ultimately those things will end up being more important once the political hyperbole and all passes or changes to a different topic. So that's kind of one, purpose or goal of this show is hopefully try to keep you focused on things, on information that will be of some advantage to you. Speaking of tariffs, I saw a let me see if I can find it. I saw a picture today of average applied tariff rates. And when I first looked at it, I was thought, yeah, that's kind of impressive. Here's the average US tariff rate. And then here's averages of other countries. Well, this graph is right. But once you notice the fine print, you got Kenya, India, which is a legit trading partner, Nepal, Egypt, Turkey, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Argentina, legitimate, Cameroon. So a number of these are just third world nations, which probably is not a terribly accurate representation of the actual trade picture. So, I look at this and I think, yeah, that's a little deceptive. It's true, but it doesn't really point out our trading problems. So I went to the WTO's website, and I know this is small. And this is Canada, their tariff policy. And so if you look at their average tariff rates, well, I'm highlighting every column, but this first column, you can see some of their rates for, meat products, 21%, 205%, 12, 13%, 8%, 6%. So on some products, down here in paper and furniture, you've got 10, 17%. Office machinery, you've got 3 to 5.5. So those are some pretty hefty rates. Well, what kind of rate do they have on their exports to the US? Well, here it shows their average rate is about 6%. A weighted average would be 4.2, which is probably more accurate. On agricultural products, 1%. So as you can tell, in trading with Canada, there's some pretty significant inequality there. If you look at China, you look at the tariffs China places on imported, food and agriculture, 14 to 25%. Oil seeds, sugars, beverages, and tobacco, 23%. Fish, 11. You go down to electrical machinery, 10, 11, 12. Well, what kind of average tariff does the U.S. impose on them? 3.3. How about non-agricultural products? 2.6. So are you getting the idea? How about Europe? Kind of the same thing with Europe. You look at, meat products, 16, 30, 13, 14. You look at oil and seeds, 20, 18. You look at fish, 11, 5. You look at, woods, clothing, 11.5. You look at electrical equipment, 2.5, 4. Well, what kind of rate does the U.S. impose on China? Weighted, 2.7. Pardon?
You mean Europe?
Europe. Yes, right. Europe. This is Europe.
Sorry.
2.7, 1.4. So you see some fairly significant differences. Now, I used a couple of AIs to kind of give me different estimates. And what I ended up with is based on 23 data. The US rate is about 3%. EU's around 6, China's at 7.5, Japan's at 4, Brazil's at 11, Argentina's at 13. Now, the problem with that calculation, what the actual percentages are provided by AI, ChatGPT and Grok, is that, if you're going to import something to Europe, to export something to Europe, and they're charging you a 20% or a 30% tariff, you aren't going to export it. So, in a sense, those rates aren't in the weighted average because they're so prohibitive. We don't even try to compete and sell products in those categories. Does that make sense? So if you look at the actual averages, they can still be a little misleading. What you really want to focus on is what rates do they charge on, or would they charge on American products? What regulations do they impose on American products? What additional taxes? So you go through those kind of things and you get a vastly different picture. So that image, while this is third world, a lot of this is third world nations, this still is not wholly inaccurate in terms of scale of the tariffs that the U.S. faces versus the tariffs that it charges. So that's a big reason for the tariffs, is trying to give American manufacturers the same opportunity to sell overseas that foreign companies have to sell in the U.S. And that's what all the brouhaha is about. So I hope that gives you a little better understanding of what's happening. I believe it gives you a better understanding of what's going on than the information you get in the media. So anybody have any questions? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Had a question or comment also on Canada's election. Most of you know that Canada held an election yesterday, and the Liberal Party candidate Mark Carney won. He did not win a majority, but he won the largest minority. So that gives him the opportunity to form the government, and he'll align with a couple other liberal parties to secure the office. So what does that mean? What's the impact or lessons there? A lot of people will think that Carney won due to Trump, and Trump saying, Canada ought to be the 51st state. I don't completely buy that. Now, keep in mind, I posted on X, and you can go look at it, that Trump didn't do Pierre any favors, and he oftentimes doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. But fundamentally, just looking at Pierre's campaign, is he ran a horrible campaign. Absolutely horrible campaign. Some pundits have described him as a Canadian version of Mitt Romney, just kind of a mediocre, not really dynamic debater, maybe a decent person, good neighbor, maybe well-intentioned, but not a great communicator, effective communicator, or necessarily highly principled or even quick on his feet. I'm not saying he's a Joe Biden. We of all nations can't throw rocks at anybody else for having idiots run for office. But the simple fact is, Pierre ran a horrible campaign. His reaction, like Trump and Trudeau, everybody knows they didn't get along.
Right.
And so Trump was, commenting on Trudeau's horrible results running the Canadian economy. I mean, what household income went down, home ownership went down, whatever, a lot of issues. And he said, throughout the comment, Canada would be better off as the 51st state. Well, that drew a lot of heat, and bless Trump's dumb little heart, he ran with it. And so it became a big issue in Canada.
Now,
but to me,
from what I've heard, the guy that was elected is a 3 passport holding Manchurian candidate who loves the WEF.
He does love the WEF. Far, far left candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, Pierre, all he really had to do was say, let's face it. Trump said something he shouldn't have, didn't mean. He's just trolling Trudeau because the Liberal Party has done such a horrible job. So let's get back to the real focus here. It's not what somebody else says in another part of the world. It's what Canadians actually have to live with, what they have experienced for the past, number of years. He didn't do that. He absolutely lost his message. And he went right along with Carney in this outrage at Trump. But keep in mind, you can never beat a leftist at outrage. The left is far better at slogans and sound bites. You're just not going to beat them trying to play their game. You need to present ideas, appeal to the working class, the working people. And Pierre just abandoned that. He ignored the damage that Trudeau had done and let Carney basically dictate the terms of the debate, terms of the discussion. And he wasn't a very effective debater. So Carney it is. I think that's still the... No, that's not the dead cat. What are you outraged at? What did I say now? Outraged at Trump. I bet she's outraged at Trump. If I was a betting man, I'm going to put it on she's outraged at Trump for what he said. 51st state. I think I got this one. And, like I said, Trump a lot of times doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. Can't beat a leftist at outrage. I tend to be more of a small government kind of person that wants the government off my ass and out of my wallet. But I know many people that watch this show don't necessarily share that same perspective. They're, more on the left, some, even hard left. And I actually admire and appreciate people on the left because they are much better at spotting problems and issues than people on the right are. They are much more sensitive to a lot of things. Now, the difference is I don't necessarily agree with their solutions. I don't think their solutions necessarily fix the problem. I think people on the right are better at solutions. But, to me, they work better together, hand in hand. I had a dear friend that I was close to for a while who was and I think I've mentioned this before. She was a yogi master, a hippie, a socialist, commie, far left individual. And still am good friends with her because, we just kind of realized that we had the same goals. We just had different paths to get there. And we're good with that. She's a beautiful person. We don't agree politically. And personally, I hate hot yoga. I hate the hell out of hot yoga. So, just like in the old cum commercial. Now, I don't remember that. Not sure about that. Might need some additional explanation on that, Melissa. Coke.
Oh, Coke.
I was like, am I seeing that correctly? Yeah, Coke commercial.
Sorry.
I remember their jingle, but I can't think of the words. Help me out, Ellen. What's Coke's old jingle? They ran these commercials for decades.
I don't know.
We want the world to sing. Come together hand in hand and teach the world to sing. Yeah, that's it.
There you go.
And, I think we ought to focus on that a whole hell of a lot more. There's a whole lot more that unites us than divides us. But we just need to focus on the things that unites us rather than divides us. We've gotten really good at focusing on what divides us. So Canada, Carney it is. One of his mate. Did you say something?
No, I was just.
Okay, sorry.
Internet at the moment, just in case.
No problem. One of Carney's major goals in Canada is bolstering carbon markets, developing a carbon border adjustment mechanism, whatever that is, and speeding up approvals of what he describes as clean energy projects. So in other words, he's a huge net zero fan. Now, he, in the past, promised to remove Canada's carbon tax, but there are now doubts that will happen. He'll have to form a government with a more left-leaning group, and they likely will demand that stay in place. So I kind of halfway don't expect that tax to get repealed anytime soon. And Canada as a country is probably more left-leaning than most in the U.S., particularly in the big cities, are overwhelmingly liberal. So this won't be a hard sell. Now, what's interesting to me is that Carney has called the U.S. an unreliable economic and security partner. This after 80 years of U.S. economic and security support for Canada. But Carney also has said he wants to move forward on a new economic and security pact with the unreliable USA. So if we're unreliable, why enter into another pact with us? I don't exactly know. All I can see is in the back of my mind is Morgan Freeman, throwing out his glance saying, good luck. So I don't know, but I can pretty much bet that Carney and Trump will never be close buddies. It's probably going to get even more, a little bit more hostile. And I think there are things that are going to add to that hostility. I saw, and I wish I had saved it, but I saw the other day a guy in Alberta who's pushing a petition for Alberta, province of Alberta, to have an independence referendum. And he needs 600,000 signatures.
Was his name Ian Runkle?
No, wasn't Ian. I'd actually, I'd love to get Ian's thoughts on this. He might just dismiss the guy as a lunatic. I obviously don't know him well enough, but he seemed pretty optimistic that they would be able to get the signatures and hold an actual referendum on succeeding from Canada. Apparently they have the right to do that. So if they do, according, as this discussion followed, they were talking about Saskatchewan will likely follow within a year. Manitoba, Yukon, Northwest Territories. It's entirely possible Canada will fracture. So, Canadian friends, what do you think? Does this really have some basis? Small? Significant? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I'd be interested in other thoughts or opinions. It's kind of hard for me, being, down here in the States, to get a good grip on what people in the rural areas of Alberta actually think.
The what areas?
Alberta.
Which parts?
Rural.
Sorry.
But I do think if Alberta does vote to succeed, that it is entirely possible that some other provinces will join them. Now, I don't know whether they'll form a Canada West or whether they'll actually consider joining. I don't know. Not even going to speculate. No idea.
It would be funny. It would be funny if they did become the 51st state. I would laugh.
It's just, I'd be interested to find out what what's people who actually live there in the region, what their sense is of the mood. I do know, and I've seen some reaction from people in Alberta and Saskatchewan that are very disgusted with the election. I think, there could have been some significant, there's significant division in the U.S. now because Trump's trying to reverse so many policies. If Harris had been elected, she would have gone even further with the policies that are controversial. And, there might have been more conflict that way as well. So I'm not speaking ill of anybody in Canada. I'm just curious as to what they're actually thinking.
Where's Carson? We need him.
Yeah.
Where's Carson?
I'd like to hear his thoughts. And I'd be interested on Ian's thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how these things will go. Once they start picking up momentum, people start looking at them and go, yeah, that may not be a bad idea. If they, don't generate momentum, people just kind of end up laughing at it. But it'll be interesting to see. And there goes E-Train again. Now you see her, now you don't. Hopefully she'll be back in a minute. Something else I saw that kind of stirred my interest was Great Britain's effort to try to fund experiments to block out the sun, quote unquote, to reduce solar radiation, to combat climate change. They are allocating, £50 million to what they call Advanced Research and Invention Agency area. Well, these experiments, which are expected to be approved within a few weeks, basically involve small scale trials. I say small scale. I don't know how small, but this is the way they describe them. So that's probably a little bit of an understatement. To explore techniques like what they call stratospheric aerosol injection, and marine cloud brightening, SAIMCB. The goal is to, alter the environment to reflect sunlight back into space, temporarily cooling the planet while emission reduction efforts continue. So the goal is to block the sun in an effort to, quote unquote, slow climate change impacts. Now, looked up some details on these. The SAI, the stratospheric aerosol injection, involves releasing little reflective particles such as sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere using aircraft or balloons. These particles reflect sunlight, which, in theory, should reduce the amount of solar energy reaching the Earth's surface. Evidence from natural phenomena, kind of like the 2014 eruption in Iceland, show that sulfur dioxide can brighten clouds and cool the planet temporarily. Melissa, all the goths will be happy about that. Are goths ever happy about anything? I don't know that I have seen a happy goth in my life. I would be interested to see that. Almost would welcome it just so I could see happy goths. Anyway, marine cloud brightening, the second one. This entails spraying particles into low-lying marine clouds to increase their reflectivity, making them brighter and more effective at reflecting sunlight. Okay. And then cirrus cloud seeding. This aims to thin high-altitude cirrus clouds, which trap heat, allowing more heat to escape into space. This method leverages sulfur emissions from aviation fuel as a proof of concept. So basically, they're going to be throwing a bunch of chemicals, which we don't normally consume, into the atmosphere. Now, I'm not sure what the benefits or complications of that would be, but I'd sure like, I don't think inhaling sulfur is really good for you. But they're going ahead with it. It's just hilarious to me how Keir Starmer, the PM of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, is a big, huge net zero fan, meaning he wants all solar and wind power. But he's now actively working to limit or decrease the sun. He wants solar power, but he's trying to decrease the sun, which will decrease the power generated. I mean, I'm like, make up your damn mind. Anyway, don't know a whole lot more details on the proposal than that, but I thought that's something that most of y'all might be interested in, and, we ought to keep an eye on. Got another question on a gentleman by the name of David Sachs. Now, David Sachs is one of Trump's, I can't necessarily say it's a cabinet level appointee because it doesn't require Senate confirmation, but he is very involved in the administration, particularly on the investment side. This is a guy that has been a strong backer of crypto and has, as a hedge fund manager, led several investments into crypto's, more influential startups. He was one of the first backers, for example, of Coinbase, and has, invested in Bitwise and a lot of ETFs. He has been a regular podcaster, arguing for new little crypto regulations. It's pretty much a pro crypto guy. And when he took office, he basically said that the war on crypto is over. But this guy is basically running. I'm trying to think of the name of the agency or the group. He is a special advisor, and he chairs the President's Council on Science and Technology. That's it. So it gives him a lot of influence over blockchain regulation and innovation. So the guy's got a lot of tech experience. He's got a lot of crypto experience. And he likely will be one of the most impactful people who's not in the headlines of anybody in the administration. And he is kind of a modest reason why I'm still big on Bitcoin. The dude believes in innovation, and he will, argue and promote policies which allow more innovation. Now, one thing he is trying to do is to come up with regulations that will establish very clear rules for like dollar-backed stable coins. These are the crypto equivalent of money markets, where, you buy them at $1, you sell them at $1. It's kind of like a safe repository for money or to make exchanges through. It pays a little bit of interest. And so he's trying to establish regulations that will make that niche more acceptable to average investors and further promote crypto development. He also was influential in Trump's drafting the Bitcoin reserve, which includes 200,000 Bitcoin that were seized mostly in the Silk Road Act and have now become permanent national assets. It's kind of a way for the U.S. to position itself as a leader in crypto technology and a quote unquote backing of the dollar. Now, Trump has said that, until they get the debt under control, they probably won't be buying any more Bitcoin, but he left open the possibility if they get the debt under control that they would increase the reserve. That's kind of interesting. So, is Sachs, good, bad, or indifferent? He's got his detractors. Anybody with influence or with the president's ear is going to have their detractors. As far as, investment management, he's picked some pretty good investments. He's been a leader in the crypto field for, 8 years, 9 years. And obviously crypto has grown in popularity and influence and value significantly over that time. So is he lucky or is he smart? It kind of helps to be both if you're going to be consistently successful. And this guy has been consistently successful. So that shows me it's not luck, though luck never hurts. It's not just luck. What's the future? If he can legitimize stable coins, obviously Bitcoin is being increasingly legitimized. I just saw another hedge fund the other day that said they were going to spend billions on acquiring Bitcoin and building up their reserve. The demand is still only going to increase. And, one thing a lot of people aren't taking into consideration is China. If China continues to collapse economically, if the tariffs do succeed in crushing them, there's going to be a lot of investment capital fleeing China. And a good chunk of that will likely, just as it did in 2017, 2018, will end up in treasuries as well as Bitcoin. So these, anytime you try to do something significant in government, it always has risk. It always has potential downside. Nothing is guaranteed. But these are smart guys who I can't think of better people to be in their position trying to shape change. And, that's really what Trump is. He's a change agent. And change agents are rarely nice people. They're normally not nice people, but they're able to get things done. Like Elon Musk. Most people would not describe him as a warm, terribly empathetic person. He's all about his vision and how to accomplish, how to build, how to do this. And he's focused on that. But he gets things done. When he started talking about building a rocket 15 years ago that would carry people to Mars, everybody thought he was nuts and just laughed. And he took a whole different approach to building rockets. Instead of trying to design and go through years of planning and development or whatever, he just started building a rocket and he sent it up and it blew up. Well, they learned. So they make changes, send up another one. It crashes. They learn things. They make changes. He was all about doing and getting this done in the quickest time possible. And he has made incredible strides. They're now catching 100-ton rockets in a pair of claws successfully. And having that thing ready to relaunch in a day. That's something that nobody would have conceived of 10 years ago. But Musk had the vision, and he was obsessed in bringing it about. And the short-term expense wasn't an issue. So, love him or hate him or indifferent to him, whatever. You've got to give him props for what he's been able to accomplish, whether you agree with what he's doing at DOGE or not. He has been extremely successful doing whatever his hands have found to do. So I admire that. I admire somebody with that kind of drive, vision, and determination. He's able to see things and envision them that others can't, as well as bring it about. That's a gift. But I wouldn't call him a nice guy necessarily. Do any questions, comments, input, output? Melissa, got to go make myself up. I almost said hottie toddy, but that's old Mrs. Cheer. A hot toddy. I will catch the last little bit on replay. Good night to you, Melissa. Love you. I hope you have a great week ahead. We'll look forward to seeing you Sunday night. And that is something I did want to throw out is that we're probably going to move Saturday nights to Sunday nights because a lot of people are having conflicts on Saturday nights. Summer's coming and, people are doing things during the day. And so we kind of thought Sunday nights might be a better time for most of our viewers. Yeah, if y'all have any feedback or ideas, please let us know. We're going to try to make some changes to the show to make it a little bit more valuable if we can. And, that's just kind of one idea that we had. And you'll be seeing some of those changes over the next month or two. So if you have any ideas, suggestions, please, let us know. You can email me at moffatonmoney@gmail.com or DM on X. If you're not following on X, please do, Moffat on Money. And you can contact me there directly. That is pretty much the questions that I had sent to me this week. I know that's kind of a little hodgepodge of stuff, but I hope it was somewhat informative, gave you a little bit better idea of what's going on. I do want to thank you all for joining us, or for the replay crew. We've got some faithful people there on replay crew, and we love you guys too. We're still working on getting E-Train's internet work fixed. So we'll continue on that, and we'll look forward to seeing you Sunday night. Appreciate y'all being with us. Do hope you have a great week ahead. And I thank you for your time. Our time is up. Bless you.